to go backwards a bit here, but so one is the hospitality ministers. The next one is our major kind of volunteer team for us on the weekend is our children's ministers, our children's ministry. So let me just give you an example of how this works for my family, and then I'll talk about that, why I think this is so important. So I have 7 kids, as I mentioned. My oldest are teenagers, 17, 15, 13. When we go to Mass on a Sunday, they come with us, they go to the whole Mass. My 11-year-old daughter, Elsa, and my 9-year-old son, Kefa, they come to Mass with us, but then they go to the Time Travelers Children's Liturgy of the Word. So you're probably familiar with that. They leave before the first reading. They come back at the offertory. And then I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. So 6-year-old, he's not in grade school yet. So 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, they go to All Stars. So All Stars is really now, we used to call it Kids Zone, but now it's All Stars, which is for children ages 6 and under. And so All Stars has programs for, again, 6 weeks to 6 years old, you can start to use it. So what that allows is for my wife, me, and I, instead of having to corral those two, who are a handful, it's crazy how God will give you the hardest ones at the end. We never would have 7 kids, they were our first 2. But instead of having to corral them, we can sit and worship for a while, you know, and sing and focus on the message. And we like to say that children's ministry is really low-hanging fruit. And again, you guys talked about it, and for a while I used to fight this, like, oh, people should just want to come because they want to grow in faith personally. Well, the reality is people live for their children a lot now in our culture. And while that's not, again, to live for your children is not healthy, we want to live for God and love our children, right? It is an opportunity to connect them back into church. And for those of you who are parents, if you think back to the first time when you first were a parent, how you realize this is a lot more difficult than I thought it was going to be. Now, before I had kids, I'd be out and about and I'd see a parent yelling at a child, and I would shake my head and think, what a terrible parent. Now, if I'm out and about and I'm running errands or going to the grocery store and I see a parent yelling at a child, I shake my head and I think, I've been there. I was a much better father before I had kids. Some of you will get that. It'll like a time bomb. You'll laugh in the car driving home. It's much more difficult than we thought. And parents really want to give to their kids religion, I think, still. I think in our culture, in our country, people still want to give religion, maybe not faith to their kids, but they realize they need moral support. And so that's why the attraction to the sacraments and things like that. And now we need to turn that from religion to faith and relationship with Christ. But that's still out there. And when it comes to children's ministry, we can win a double victory. We have a former staff member who used to say, do something for my kids and you do something for me. When we do something for kids, we can do something for their parents, and we can score a double victory. Also, when it comes to children's ministry, kids are more evangelical. They will share their faith a lot more than adults will. As adults, we're nervous to do that. We're scared we're going to offend somebody. But kids, they don't have those inhibitions. For example, Brandon is somebody who works on our staff. He's kind of in charge of data and finance. And he told us about how his daughter went to her kindergarten teacher and asked her to come to church, right? And she came. She came because she asked. Kids will share their faith and be willing to share with their friends in a way that, as adults, we can be scared to do that. So we say it's about the music, the message, and the ministers. Let me share with you a story, or a testimony from somebody from our pews. And this is written from a guy named Josh. He wrote this: Dear Nativity, I just want to thank everyone at the church for being so welcoming and friendly to our family. For us, the barrier that Nativity has removed is the frustration we've experienced with having our 3 children attend Mass with us. We had taken many months off from attending any church because we'd become so frustrated, continually trying to keep our children quiet or occupied while getting nothing out of it at all, except irritated with one another. Someone recommended Nativity, so we gave it a try. On our first visit, a very friendly person led us around, and showed us where we could take our children. She was welcoming and helpful, and our kids were so comfortable with the experience, they wanted to come back. Every time that we've entered or left church, someone has smiled at us and greeted us, and that means so much. The parking volunteers were helpful, dedicated, and friendly. The hospitality and service, the fellowship, and the incredible organization have convinced us that Christ's presence is alive in this church. All right, notice again, it wasn't the music, it wasn't the homily, it was the hospitality that convinced them of Christ's presence. The program for our 20-month-old is wonderful and safe, and All Stars for our 4- and 5-year-old children has helped enrich their church experiences. Thanks to Nativity, my wife and I can now sit as a couple for an hour, worship, sing, and renew our spirits just enough to make it through another crazy week. You know, there you go, there's a difference. Is it obligation? No, it's about renewing our spirits. We look forward to every Sunday now, and we plan to start getting more involved, which I come to believe is the only way to keep our faith alive. So that was written by Josh, and Josh was true to his word. He got involved, started running, volunteering as a host team member at our 9 o'clock Mass. He now runs that team, and his wife Megan actually serves on our staff now part-time, running our Time Travelers program. So you see kind of in Josh, that's the story we're hoping to create. That's why we have our volunteer ministers. We want someone moving from, I gave up on church, I'm not going anymore, to now, you know, start coming, have a great experience, and now investing in the church. So I just want to give you, I'm going to break here for a second. I'm going to give you some questions. I want to show you a little bit about our conference that we do. This is there's the Dallas Forward quote. This is a conference we did in 2018. Our next one is in 2020. If you came in and had a little bit of information about it, but just, you can check this out. This is a recap. By the way, before I get to that, again, rebuiltparish.com is where we have resources available. Do a podcast. Dan was listening. Dan, where's Dan? So you were listening to it, and so a podcast once a month comes out. You can find it on rebuiltparish.com. We also send out a monthly newsletter, and then we have a Rebuilt Parish Association, again, where we have resources that you can, it's a yearly subscription, tons of resources that you can sign up to get what we do. But here's a little recap of our last 2020 conference, and here's a recap of it. So now I just want to give you a chance to talk about your weekend experience. You can talk about what is going well musically, what is going well message-wise, what's one step you can invest in more of your music, same thing with the homily, what is one way to improve the message, and your hospitality, what's one step you could improve it. So give you a chance to talk about that at your tables, and then we'll come back. On your way? Sorry.
When you said about spending money, are you talking about hiring if you don't have any singers?
Yep.
Are you literally hiring outside the parish to come in and?
You could, yeah. I would say that, yeah. Yeah. And even less is more. You could be like, I've seen some places where they have one woman with one parish we looked at, they had a woman with a beautiful voice and they had like guitars. And we're like, just go focus on her. Like, the other guys could not play at her level. Just let her sing and it's beautiful. That kind of idea.
What is your parish base?
I'm sorry?
What is your parish base? How many families are there?
We have about, so we talk about, I think we have about 5,000 families in our database system. About 2,500 are more engaged. 47 families? Okay.
So then, so that's why, I mean, and we actually have really good music, but I was just curious about
Yeah.
that's what you meant.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's right size to your parish. I don't know that, right. But at least having, and I don't know how much, Ruth, your community and how much to grow, but.
Well, I read your book years ago, and I was really excited about so many aspects, in particular the homily, and I love the idea of that because we're a 6-parish cluster.
All right, go through these areas, or if you have a question, you can do that too. Anyone have good ideas with music? How to invest more in music? Any come up? Okay, go ahead.
I was sharing that the liturgist at my parish growing up actually did some recruiting for cantors at the local karaoke bar.
Karaoke bar? Okay, so that's a great idea. I never thought about that. I love that. So recruit good singers at the local karaoke bar. That's an awesome idea. Other ideas on music?
I don't know if we addressed how we deal with parishioners who want to contribute to that music, who aren't really
Skilled at it. Yeah, so the question is, how do you talk to people who want to contribute, but that's not their gift? I mean, those are hard conversations, but in talking to them and saying, first of all, I think number one thing, ministry, no one has a right to do ministry. And it is something that, unfortunately, happens in our culture, right? And sometimes that's because somebody's done something for so many years, they become entitled to it, and it was given to them, and no one's ever talked to them about that. But, and this is a mindset, nobody has a right to do ministry. We do talk about kind of rights as Catholics and rights as Christians, and in one sense I get that. But my rights were completely gone when Jesus went to the cross. Right? Anything I do, especially serving the parish and serving in ministry, is because hopefully it brings people closer to Christ. And so if it doesn't, then hopefully I don't want to do that. Now again, people aren't always that mature, I think, but we start there. What's the purpose of the ministry? The purpose is always to bring people to Christ. And if someone can't do it with skill, it becomes a stumbling block. I mean, I think you need to do things with holiness and character, but you got to do it with skill as well. So I think you begin the conversation there. But at the same time, we value you. We believe you have a contribution to make to this parish. It's just not in music. So again, that's so much easier to tell you that right there than to have a real conversation. But
And just another comment that it doesn't happen in our parish, but there are many parishes where they do not have a priest who is a homilist.
mm-hmm.
And what do you do about that?
Where you don't have a priest that's a homilist, and again, that was a kind of question that came up. And again, I think the number one question we always get is, how do I get my priest on board? That kind of it's leading up is. And then it's funny, we'll have priests come to us and say, how do I get my people on board? So, I think having the conversation, talk about also trying to begin a process, hey, how do we support you and help you in this? In the sense of, hey, we talked about it at this conference, we talked about a team atmosphere, and maybe even go to Acts 6, like, here it says, like, we're supposed to be helping each other in this. How can we help you? Get better, because we can all get better. Again, I know all these conversations are so much easier to have in theory than in practice.
I'd share another idea about cultivating the relationship with the musician in the parish. So the same liturgist, she paid for me to receive guitar lessons and then paid me $5 as a 5th grader to play at Mass.
Yeah, that's great.
So, and then that's sort of, now I need a bass player. She paid for lessons for me to get bass playing lessons.
So paying for kids or developing young people, I think, is a huge thing too, right? How do we develop the talent? Or if you spot a younger person that has talent, how do we cultivate that relationship when so they grow up, they can use it for the church? And especially, I mean, seeing high school students or young people serve in the church is so invigorating to people's faith. So how about, if you have a music, you can shoot that out, or message or homily about improving it.
I think one can also educate the ones that are involved to become better. We had a wonderful woman leading our resurrection choir for funerals, Gretchen Kruger. She has passed away, but she single-handedly turned around the music in our parish like 3 decades ago, or 4, 5. And she went and got conductor courses at the university to become able to bring in music that gave some life and didn't make it like a dirge, but hopeful Christian funeral. And she did that again, but she continued her education and then reached out to liturgical courses. And,
so the ongoing training is a huge part, and people who know people in music kind of bring other people in. I would say the kind of number one thing for anyone who does communicate that you can do to improve your message is to watch yourself or listen to yourself. That's incredible. It's probably the most painful thing in the world next to childbirth. Actually, not that I know that from personal experience, but seeing my wife, I guess. But it is very painful, but it helps make you better. Again, if you can bring anybody else on your team to help give you feedback and to help, again, just all of us as people, we have limited life experience. So if we can learn from the breadth and depth of the people around us, that can help our message. How about hospitality? Anybody have any ideas on how to improve that? Or was everybody just focused on music the whole time? Is that what this is?
what you said about hosts instead of ushers.
Hosts instead of ushers, yeah.
Change that attitude too, I think.
Yeah, and sometimes it's more than that. We had to fire a bunch of ushers, so that was part of our story too. We just had to say, you can apply to be an usher, but a host minister.
One thing that we talked about is personal invitation in hospitality. So something like an usher or a host, it's not that difficult of a job as compared to like music, but there's plenty of people who are able-bodied and able to do those things, but they've just never been asked. And so to actually reach out and ask people to be a part of that ministry.
Okay. So it's just the whole idea of getting more people to do it and come from the one-on-one asks. And getting people who are naturally kind of friendly too. Again, if someone's grumpy, don't ask them, but if they're friendly.
It may not be as challenging as the music ministry, but it is the first impression of the church. Welcoming you in, smile on your face, looking at the person, it is the first impression.
Yeah, no, that's why it's so important. In fact, some of these ideas came out of, we watched them called the First Impressions Conference, and it's just about how you create that hospitality from beginning, middle to end. Any other suggestions or questions about hospitality?
I would just say it helps when the pastor is there to greet everybody. I mean, he gives them a hug every time everybody comes in, so I think that helps in hospitality.
So you're saying it helps when the pastor hugs and hugs people, and that and that can depend, because you might not. I'm not a hugger, so that would be. And it's funny thing in our parish, it's a very interesting dynamic. And there's probably a tension a little bit for pastors and priests on this. Father Michael does not greet people, and partly the size, and partly he's getting ready, but partly he's also found over years, if he goes out and greets people, the people we are asking to volunteer to greet people start talking to him, rather than greeting the people that are coming to church. So he doesn't go out there, because what happens is they start talking to him. And I don't know if that's a dynamic everywhere, but that's a dynamic we've found. So you just have to be aware of that. All right, I'll turn it over to Steve, who I think is going to move us to lunch.
Amazing morning. Thank you.
Thanks.
Just a little bit of funding, I'm sorry, you're motioning me over here into the camera. Just a little bit about funding for today. It's due to your Catholic Services Appeal donation. Then you all paid some $10 fee, but I wanted to point out that Catholic United Financial also gave us a nice donation. And I'll introduce Nate from Catholic United. New face in the crowd. So, we're going to have lunch now, and I'm going to turn it over to Bishop if he can say grace like he has for 17 years of this program.
We begin in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Heavenly Fathers, we prepare to eat this meal. We give thanks for all your many gifts, your blessings. We certainly pray that through the nourishment that we get from it, that we be strengthened and encouraged on in our lives, bringing praise and glory to your holy name, lives creating disciples of your Son. And we just ask this as we pray together, a prayer that I made up 17 years ago. Bless us, O Lord, these thy gifts, which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
I'm going to show you a little video here of just a parish that's trying to put some of the principles of Rebuilt into practice. So I forget which one this is going to be, but Tabernacle, New Jersey.
From the very beginning when I first came, very welcoming parish. He had a lot of ministries, people were very active, but it was something different that Rebuilt was offering us. We zeroed in on mission, music, and message. And so we started to make some real wonderful changes in our music program. We picked up the message series, which I find phenomenal, and the whole idea of mission, what our mission was, and making it clear that our community, this is what we're about. We're about growing disciples.
After reading the book, I think the thing that so emphasized where we wanted to go was the idea of looking at everything we do from the vision of the unchurched. Some of the changes that we implemented initially, as we looked through the eyes of the unchurched, were the simple things that were so obvious, but we hadn't noticed before. We didn't have a sign to say where the parish office was. We hadn't really branded our parish with a logo. The building was clean, so that when someone came in the building, they felt comfortable.
The RPA resources helped us tremendously, especially with regard to the message series. Not only that, but to the other things that you provide, the webinars that you provide, consistently to help the parishes grow.
It also helps us as we've introduced new ministries, when we introduced the cafe ministry, to teach our ministers that it's not just about serving coffee, but it's a whole hospitality experience. And we've actually used that information from our PA to discuss with them the importance of their role in the cafe. We also use it now. We're looking forward to introducing access point, first serve, and to be able to have information and outlines available of how to proceed has helped us tremendously.
Not everybody is going to accept, the changes that you see is important, to grow. And when people are saying their ways, when you begin to make changes and challenges that, and you get some pushback. But I always remember what Father Michael White said at his conferences, never give up. Don't stay. And I think that's because it's really not about me, it's all about Jesus. And I truly believe that Jesus is going to help me, and other parishes as well, to move ahead, to really change and make the experience of church important to the world, especially in the Catholic.
church exists to make disciples of Jesus Christ. It's that simple. And we can say that in different ways. I like how one church says to turn irreligious people into fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Another church I know of says to lead people in a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. We just simply say to love God, love others, and make disciples. So how do we fulfill that mission that Jesus gave to us? We just say it's simple but not easy. We say church over and again. Church is simple but not easy. There's 3 simple things we need to do if we're going to fulfill the mission Jesus gave to us. Number 1, we need to think about church from the unchurched person's perspective, or make our parishes welcoming to the outsider would be another way to do that. We think about church from the unchurched person's perspective, so we are welcoming to the outsider. You know, it's said about Jesus in Luke 15. You know, the Pharisees are criticizing him, and they say this man welcomes and receives sinners. And then what was meant as a criticism of Jesus is really one of the greatest compliments to him. Jesus welcomed and received sinners, which means he's welcomed and received me. He's welcomed and received you. And so if we're going to join Jesus on the mission to seek and save the lost, we're going to welcome and receive sinners as well. So we want to welcome outsiders. We want to think about church from the unchurched person's perspective, so we can welcome outsiders. We want to create an excellent weekend experience. And then third, we want to challenge church people to take ownership of their faith. Another way we say this is shape a clear discipleship path. So that's what we're going to talk about in this next section. How do we get people to serve the larger mission of making disciples and to choose to grow as disciples themselves? And when you get focused on this question, 2 things happen. You will reach new people, you'll go wider, and people will grow as disciples, they'll go deeper. If you think about it, people have one of kind of 4 relationships with your parish. Right? We could separate them in 4 different categories. And they have different commitments to your parish. The first box, we could say, are the people in your community who don't go to church and don't go to your church. And so their commitment is to not coming, right? Those are the people in the community. Then the next group is a group of people who are the consumers in your parish. The consumers come to your parish because they come to consume. They come because it's all about them. They come because out of guilt, they come out of obligation, they come purely because it's good for their family, but they're there to consume. Then the next box you have is contributors. Those are people who are giving something back to your parish. Time, energy, money, something in some way. And then you have the committed people over here. They're the people that, probably the 7% that run the whole thing, that make the whole thing go, right? There's a handful of those probably in all our parishes of people we know. These are the committed leaders. Now, the thing is, when we can get people moving from simply consuming to contributing, right, that's attractive. People who are, when people will move out of that consuming box to contributing, I think it creates a spiritual space so those people who are not coming become more interested. Now, let me just say a word about consumers. Consumers, again, I described them a little bit, but consuming doesn't mean that people come for felt needs. You know, Jesus, all of us have felt needs, and we all come to church needy. You know, we are needy by nature. And Jesus accepted people wherever they were in relationship with him. I mean, people did not come to Jesus for altruistic reasons, usually. Right? They came because they thought they would receive something from him. Right? They came because they were hungry and wanted to be fed. You know, they came because they wanted to be healed. They came to Jesus because he was a great preacher and teacher and could engage them. And even when we look at the apostles, again, they didn't come to Jesus out of purely altruistic reasons. In fact, they came because they thought one day he was going to be king. They thought he was going to be king in Israel. He was going to be large and in charge. And when he was large and in charge, they wanted to sit at his left and his right. So, you know, I mean, think about, you know, when Jesus announced he's going to the cross, and that's the question they ask him right afterwards. All right, Jesus, when you enter into your kingdom, when can we sit at your left and your right? And that people kind of come to church and expect blessing, I don't think that necessarily makes them consumers either. Because over and over again, Jesus says to follow him, but he doesn't say to follow him just for purely altruistic reasons. He says there's blessing in your life, left and your right. And that people kind of come to church and expect blessing, I don't think that necessarily makes them consumers. Challenges him to give away all his possessions. And of course, the rich young man cannot do that. And so Peter comes up to Jesus and says, Master, we have left everything and followed you. What's in it for us? And Jesus doesn't like slap Peter on the face and say, what do you mean what's in it for you? There's nothing in it for you. Just follow me, you know. He doesn't do that, just so you know, in case you thought that was in the gospel. No, and says, Jesus says, I promise you that whatever you have left behind for me, of families, of money, possessions, whatever you left, you will receive 100-fold in this life and the life to come. When Jesus washes the disciples' feet at the Last Supper, he says, you call me Lord and Master, indeed I am. And if I wash your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. And blessed are you if you do this. Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, go into your room and pray in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. So consumers is not just about wanting to experience the blessing of God or believing that it should be worth it to invest in a relationship with God. I think Jesus promised that over and over again. Again, the consumer, though, becomes it's all about me. And that's what we're trying to move people off of. Because for people to really grow in their faith, it can't be all about them. But again, laying down our lives, right? He who loses his life will find it. And again, when people start contributing more to your parish, it creates, and they move from just consuming to being about them to contributing to the larger mission of the parish to personally grow and reach people in the community, the parish will grow. And there's a kind of a lie out there that says this, that if you're a church, you can go deeper or you can go wider, right? That if you got to make a choice. The one, we can go deeper. We can develop deep discipleship programs and deep prayer programs, or we can choose to be kind of superficial and reach the unchurched in our community. And I really believe that's a lie. Because here's the deal. The way that real growth happens in a church is when you challenge the people in the pews to go deeper in the faith so that they can reach the people that are not currently coming. You know, I was reading a book by N.T. Wright, Surprised by Hope, and N.T. Wright talks about in that book about how the major question, and we see it, again, we're going to see it in the reading, not this Sunday, but the following Sunday. The major question, for Ascension, the major question driving the apostles is, like, Lord, when are you going to restore the kingdom of Israel? And that was the question. When is Israel going to be restored to its promise as a political and military power? God, when are you going to bring healing back to Israel? And what Israel didn't understand was that God wanted to bring healing to it, but bring healing because it was a blessing to the nations. That in being a source of blessing to the nations, Israel would be healed and restored to its proper place. Well, the same is true for us. And the same is true for the people in our pews. God wants to bring blessings into our lives, but the way in which we do that is being a blessing unto others. So discipleship and evangelization, they are not separate things. They are two sides of the same coin. And if we get people to embrace that and to move in discipleship, we will reach people that are not currently coming. So as a church, we say this, that there are 5 steps we want people to take, but I'm not going to give you that first, because I want you to think about it first. So what I want you to think about is this. All right. Before I get into it, just at your table for about 5 minutes, what have been the practices or steps that have been vital for you to grow as a follower of Jesus? Just think about that. And what are the steps that have been vital for you? You are here today. You've given up your time today to be here to learn more about bringing people in relationship with Jesus. And that's because a program has helped you come to connect with Jesus. Share that at your table. And second, what are the steps in your parish that you ask mass members to take that are clearly communicated? And are there any ones that are not there? So take a few minutes at your table, look at those two questions, and we'll come back in a second. Oh, wow. How about just a different program, just on that first question, different programs, environments, people say, hey, this is where I grew, my faith grew a bunch. You can shout them out, or nobody. None of you is a follower of Jesus. Nothing's.
As life goes on, for me, that just became a clearer way of, the core is always there, no rock in that, but just every day that goes on, somebody else wants an answer, so you're kind of forced into developing a network of like-minded people.
All right, so somewhat relationships, though, is what I hear there, that other people of faith have helped you grow in faith. Other ones? Prayer? Who taught you to pray?
Curiosity.
Okay. You self-taught yourself. Well, you taught yourself to pray. All right.
Meeting the person.
Meeting Christ.
Meeting Jesus.
And where did you meet Jesus?
In the scriptures, but
All right.
in the sacramental life of the church.
Scriptures, sacraments, going to Mass. Okay. So some programs at church, though, your First Communion program, your confirmation program, they helped you? Oh, good. Any others?
Like a faith crisis, illness.
Right.
Or challenge, some impossible situation they get out.
Yeah.
You realize the only way you can get out of it is with Christ.
Right. So faith crisis. We did a whole series this past January called Unexpected. We kind of talked about that. And it's interesting, too. Why do some people go through a crisis and they get deeper in faith? And why do some people go through a crisis and they lose their faith? We talked about that in our series. It was just interesting. Anybody else? Environments?
There are different steps, but basically I look at my primary youth ministry.
Youth ministry? Okay, so your youth program, probably good relationship with your youth minister? Okay. All right, so those are some of them. We've come up with 5 steps, and there's different things out there. So first of all, I would just say this. As parishes, and I won't go on that second question, but a lot of times we don't even think through this clearly. What is it that helps people grow as followers of Jesus Christ? And what do we want people to do? And so this is a conversation I would really encourage you to take back to your parish council, to whoever, and say, all right, and even have that question. What were the programs? What were the environments? What were the things that helped you become a follower of Jesus Christ? Because often what has helped us grow as followers of Christ, we want to reproduce for other people, right? If there's somebody who really loves a program, or really they want to do Alpha, or they want to do, Christ Renews His Church, or they want to do, whatever program they want to do, it's because they had an experience of Christ in that program, or they had an environment that was similar to that. Right? So they want to do Bible study because they were in a Bible study and that brought them to Christ, or brought the relationship with Christ to a whole new level. And as parishes, as we are in the disciple-making business, but we don't always think about what makes disciples. Now, on one level for us as a parish, if you said, what do you do, for faith formation? Or what do you do to make disciples? I would say everything. If it's not making disciples, I don't want to do it. Right, and so even beginning with the weekend Mass, how is that making disciples? How is the message making disciples? How's the ministers making disciples? How is the music making disciples? But beyond that, though, there is, I think, programs or things we ask people to do. If going to Mass made you a disciple was enough, we would stop there, but it doesn't. We need more. So once we get people in the door and get people engaged at Mass, we have 5 steps we want people to take. And again, these are our 5 steps. This is what we do, and I'll be able to point to you about a little bit why each one is important to us. You can say those steps aren't great and come up with your own. You can go out and research. If you research, again, growing places, they're very clear on what they want people to do. Again, for us, Saddleback, the 5 purposes, they talk about worship, fellowship, discipleship, ministry and evangelization. They undergird everything we do. Again, what you pick as that is, I think, there's some things that probably won't make disciples, and they won't. We're going to have, I don't know. Anyway, I can't think of anything funny. But there's certain things aren't going to make disciples. But as you study, again, I think different parishes, different churches that have figured this out and are strategic about it, you will see similarities. So again, I talked about the 5 purposes at Saddleback. North Point has a whole thing called 5 things God uses to grow your faith. And it's very interesting, so they're like practical biblical teaching, personal relationship, personal ministry, providential relationships, pivotal circumstances. That's they have these 5 things. We're going to talk about 5 steps. You'll begin to see patterns. Again, the main point is, as a parish, if we're going to be successful, we got to be very clear about what we want people to do. So here are our 5 steps that we have come up with over time. And it's an acronym, so it must be from God, okay? All right, so first one, we want people to serve in ministry or missions. Serve in ministry or missions. Right, I think pretty obvious that if you're going to become like Jesus, you're going to learn to serve. Jesus says, for the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. Philippians have the same attitude of that of Christ Jesus, who, though he was in form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be grasped, but rather he emptied himself. Again, we say somebody is full of themselves. Jesus emptied himself, taking the form of a slave. At the Last Supper, we know he got down on his feet and he washed the disciples' feet and says, I'm your Lord and Master. If I wash your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. We need people to serve, and we say serve in ministry or missions. And what we mean by that, serve in ministry, we want people to serve at the church and serve, again, some of those roles I talked about earlier today, or missions, which is outreach outside the church. So helping in Baltimore City, helping in, we have mission trips to Haiti and to Kenya. We have done in Nigeria in the past. Safety, we haven't gone there as much, but we want, we're just saying, if you want to become like Jesus, you have to learn to serve. Another quote from Ephesians, I think it's 4:10, where Paul says, some are apostles, some are pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. Right? So what's our role as church staff, if we serve on church staff or church leaders? We're to equip the saints, the people in the pews, for the work of ministry. So the body of Christ will be built up. And Paul goes on to say, so the people will reach full stature of maturity in Christ. You cannot mature and become a fully devoted follower of Jesus Christ if you don't serve. It's just that simple. So we say serve in ministry or missions. Second, we say tithe and give. Now, because this was a stewardship day, and I know it's not all about money, but I am going to drill real deep into money and giving. But tithing and giving. Jesus said 2,000 years ago, in a largely agrarian society, that money is the #1 competitor God faces for our heart. And again, if that was true in a largely agrarian society, how much more true is it today in this consumeristic culture? So if people are going to tithe, we want to teach people to tithe and give. Our next step we talk about is engaging in a small group. Engaging in a small group. So Romans 1:10, I think it is, Paul says, I will learn from your faith and you will learn from mine. That we talk about this way, we just need some friends in faith. Our relationships are going to determine the direction and sometimes even the outcomes of our lives. We become more like the people we spend time with. And so one person talked about relationships. That we are made relational beings. In Genesis 2:18, God said, God creates the whole world. Everything is good. There's no sin that's even entered the world. And then God says this, it is not good for the man to be alone. And of course, we know that's, connects also to the gift of marriage, but it just is a human issue. It is not good for us to be alone. You know, we don't only have a God-shaped hole, we have a human-shaped hole. We are made for relationship with other people. And we're going to leverage that to help people grow in faith, or we won't. You know, peer pressure is not just a teenager thing, it's a human thing. So we say we want people to engage in a small group because that's our strategy to help people develop friends in faith. Because we really believe you need that to grow in your faith. Fourth one we say is practice prayer and sacraments. Probably not a lot of argument on this, that people learn to pray. And as a church, we tend to have at least a lot of programs that help people pray. We have rosary, or we have devotionals, or we have those kind of things. I don't know if we always help teach people to pray. You said you were self-taught. No one taught you how to pray. But we don't always help people learn to pray. But I think we'd all agree prayer is partly. You know, Jesus modeled this for us in Mark, especially in Mark's gospel. We hear he got up early in the morning and went to pray. He taught the apostles how to pray. So prayer, we want people to practice prayer and sacraments. Other reason we say practice prayer and sacraments too, this comes a little bit maybe from my Ignatian background. I love how the Jesuits are called contemplatives in action. You know, that when we say practice prayer and sacraments, we don't mean just pray and that's it and put it off to the side, but practice prayer. Put into practice what you have discovered in prayer. And then the next one we say is this: share your faith. So this is evangelization for us. So these are 5 that we've kind of come up with over time. Again, you can steal them, rip us off and send us a fruit basket. A friend of mine, we used to borrow ideas from other churches. He said, rip them off and send them a fruit basket. We're all on the same team. If you haven't read Purpose Driven Life or 40 Days of Purpose, that's a great, or Purpose Driven Church, again, all about the 5 purposes. That's a great something to read. Again, for me, North Point's 5 things God uses to grow your faith. Again, the point is this, is that, again, as churches, if we want people to grow as disciples, how are we shaping a clear discipleship path? How are we helping them to grow? Okay? And here are the thing about the 5 steps that I think that I like about this that we've developed. And again, a lot of them, it's nothing really that original. If you went to other churches, you'd see all this stuff somewhere. But what they both do is build up people's individual faith and build up the church corporately, right? It does both, right? Again, if you want to grow closer to Christ, you need to serve. But as church, we need people to volunteer and serve and give their time. If you want to go closer to Christ, you need to learn to give your money and to offer it back to God as a sacrifice. Well, in the church, of course, we need money to fulfill our ministry and mission as an organization, as a church. People need small groups. Again, they need relationships. But again, we have found that small groups is one of the biggest things that creates community in our parish, that builds it up. We have found that if you're in a small group, you will give twice as much to the parish as you would give if you were not in a small group. It just builds up the church. Prayer, obviously we need prayer if we're going to grow. And then sharing your faith. Again, you grow personally as you invite other people to the church, as you're kind of risk and are bold enough to ask other people. And of course, that's the way the church grows in numbers and reaching new people, is because people share their faith. So then the kind of big question becomes, how do we get people to do this? How do we encourage people to serve and give and get in a small group, right? Because that's what we have to do as leadership. So I want to share with you 7 ways in which we help people to take these steps of faith. So number 1,